Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Thanks everybody for coming. This is the Ambient Creativity Hackfest, which we've been going on over in Building 20. It's one of the first for Microsoft. First off, my name is Rick Barraza. I'm in a group called Quality and Experience Design and Developer Evangelism. Been working with a lot of our partners for a while now. And this Hackfest, we've really been focusing it to help have these conversations, enable these tool sets for people who tend to be on the envisioning side of things. A quick roster of everybody who's here, and we have some really special slides today. And tomorrow we will be at the Garage Stay Late and Code mixer for kind of the second half of this talk. So if you can make it to that one, that would be great. So we have some really interesting things to show and kind of a thematic story to start today. And tomorrow we can end up with pizza and beer at the garage, which is a great way to end any two-part talk. But from the Hackfest, everybody, most is here in the front row and spread out throughout the audience. But we've invited friends from Digital Kitchen who have been doing a lot of great work with us traditionally as Microsoft, but they haven't interacted too much from the engineering side of things. And we're really trying to address that issue of what does it look like when design and engineering and the arts start mashing together, right? So that's what this Hackfest is all about. So we've invited them to come in on those conversations. We have Stephen and well, actually the Digital Kitchen guys. Can you kind of raise your hand so they know so they're sitting over there. Where's Al?
Al had to go back to work.
Okay, good. Yeah, so we have people up from Portland, from Wieden+Kennedy, specifically the Lodge, and they have a great presentation today. And Genevieve Hoffman is right over there. Michael Svizos will be closing us on architecture and how computation is affecting some of those mediums. Anna also, if you can wave, you'll be talking today. James George is a bit of a homecoming, I guess, and we'll start off with him. Joshua Noble from Frog, and Joel Pride, Stimulant, and Leah Martinez, who is now working at Microsoft on Internet of Things. So when we started the Hackfest to when we started pulling it off, come to find out one of them's actually started working with us. So that's really good. So there's kind of an insider track there if we want to go that way. And again, my name is Rick Barraza. Before we start off on the slides, I think we'd like to first loop back with James. A lot of this kind of started, these conversations started 2 years ago or so when you and Golan came to visit. Can you give a quick summary of that initial visit, the artist in residency, because you're our first artist in residence, right? And how that's been going so far, specifically with clouds?
Sure. You want me to?
Sure. Come on up.
Should I use this or this? Which one of these is this?
There you go.
Best? Yeah. So this is very off the cuff. I haven't prepared anything, but so working forward, I met Rick almost 2 years ago now when I came with my mentor, a professor from Carnegie Mellon named Golan Levin, and we were invited to do a presentation on what it would mean to have an artist in a research institution like MSR. And then, there's a long history of this with things like Bell Labs, other research institutions that have worked with people who are traditionally associated with being artists, such as like Andy Warhol. But there's less of a tradition of artists who use code as their primary medium and work outside of technology companies or even research or academic contexts that are actually in the wild making their work in cultural capacities for institutions or freelance, interfacing directly with a place like MSR. So we came and we talked about what that could be like. There was obviously a lot of resonance between researchers and people working in non-traditional ways with software. So I got along with a lot of people here at MSR. And the following year, I came back for a pilot program, a 3-month residency. And
can you give a brief, sorry to put you on the spot,
no, sure.
On clouds and kind of when you're MSR here, what were some of the things you're exploring?
Alt tab and show some stuff?
Let's just show some
stuff.
Sure. There you go.
Open a new tab. I have a Mac in front of me, but it's acting like a PC.
Sure.
Looks like someone's been Googling that. I know. Long history. A lot of white beards. Maybe I'll just show some images. So, without, maybe I can probably play this. If it won't do sound, I can turn the sound off. So this is just a demo of this project. So one of the, does that turn off? You can watch this and research it on your own time. But one of the main reasons I was invited here is I was working on this design fiction software project that imagined the future of photography through the Kinect sensor, to put it in broad strokes. And the way I was working with that was I was interviewing a lot of people in this community, in the arts computational engineering community, and kind of creating this interactive experience that allows a viewer to navigate this archive of over 10 hours of footage that all takes place in computational 3D space. So that's this project Clouds. It's now sort of completing its run through the festival circuit. So we showed at Sundance and Tribeca in their interactive installation divisions.
Yeah, that great shot of Robert De Niro.
This works on the Oculus Rift, which is a virtual reality head-mounted display that a lot of people are talking about, recently acquired by Facebook. We've been actually, the first time I touched an Oculus was here at MSR with Andy and Benko, and created a prototype of our project to work on the platform, and so we've been showing it that way too. So it kind of goes to show the way that someone like myself coming into a place to have access to a lot of new technologies and new techniques, but I have somewhat different intentions and different audiences that I speak to with my work. There can be a lot of synergy there.
So just to ask a couple more questions while you have the microphone, and then we'll be moving on. But let's actually dig a little bit deeper when you started this, because you didn't start first with Clouds. You started hacking the Kinect, right?
Yeah.
And so you also mentioned design fiction, which might be a term that a lot of people aren't really familiar with, right? And we've had these conversations around zero scale productions, right? So can you actually talk a little bit more of how you got into computational photography, what Kinect did it, and frankly, how you started hacking the Kinect, on what platforms, and why you chose those platforms?
Yeah, it's a very leading question, Rick.
Well, we've had this conversation many, many times. So.
Definitely. So just briefly, my background's in a mix between art and computer science. So I studied both actually here at UW, but I've been living in Brooklyn working freelance since graduating undergrad. And I moved to New York because there's a hotbed of people there working on this thing called Open Frameworks, which is a C++ open source toolkit for doing essentially graphics and high-powered graphics and vision in a very designer-friendly way, like ways that kind of get rid of a lot of things that make C++ inaccessible to novice or self-taught programmers. I've been contributing a lot to that platform and really thinking about interactivity and computer vision and thinking of the aesthetics that are coming out of that. So when the Kinect came out, to me, it was great for interactive installations, which we were doing, but it also suggested this potential future where you have like a merger between computer graphics and things that are synthesized, like a Toy Story computer graphics, and then live action, which traditionally has been a sort of more compositing workflow, like let's make one and let's make the other and let's mix them together. But when you start having these computational cameras, things that see the world in a geometric way, you can see where in the future that distinction may start to break down. So we started making projects that were rooted in stories or sort of science fiction, but actually began to explore what that may look like. And never really, especially at the outset, intended to develop anything that worked or could be distributed or sold as a application. The software never left our computers, but the images that it generated sparked a lot of imagination and conversations around it. So if you think the word design fiction, it's sort of like science fiction, except where the thing that you're fictionalizing is a potential product or process in the immediate future.
Yeah, how it'll affect people.
And you don't need to make it, you just have to make a story around it, and that can often influence what other people who have a lot more time and energy than you will end up making.
Well, it brings up an interesting point, because you not only needed to... Do you have the picture of the RGBD toolkit?
Sure.
So
I updated my website like 3 or 4 days ago. I'm so glad I did. So we actually renamed it to DepthKit because RGBD is really hard to say, and it was... not that DepthKit is that easy to say either, but so this is, it does work. People can experiment. You can download it. You can install it on Mac or Windows. It calibrates a SLR or some external video camera to a Kinect sensor, an ASUS sensor, and allows you to make this sort of science fiction, neuromancer, digital reality feeling video, which has become coveted in sort of a...
Well, we had Eminem Didn't Eminem use it for
Yeah.
their rap? Well,
Sure, it's been used in a few different places from the open source software. So yeah, one of the probably the most views that it's been had is Eminem's latest Rap God video used a few sequences of it, and we worked with the director to make sure it was working for him. But we're not, my team isn't, or my collaborators aren't actually doing any of this work. Occasionally we freelance, but we're really putting it out into the world, free and open source, and seeing where it goes and what conversations, meeting people through it, really.
Yeah, it's weird having the kind of side-to-side facing the audience conversation, but one of the things we've talked about on this is we are seeing at zero scale and creatives leveraging computation, right? When we're really at this exploring state, it kind of goes back to that Renaissance period, and by that I mean you have to be both a tool maker, and you're very active in the open frameworks community, right? So you're a tool maker who makes the paintbrushes and paints, and then you have to turn around and paint, the Last Supper with it at that point. And that kind of Renaissance meshing of personality of skills seems to happen quite a bit at zero scale experiences, right? The prototypes, the concept cars, the fashion couture, right? The things that we're doing with technology these days. So in that area of being a tool maker who also turns around and uses a tool, as opposed to saying I'm an engineer who makes the tools and I give them to artists who don't know how to make tools and only know how to paint pretty pictures, right? I mean, is that one of the main drives from open frameworks and Cinder and processing?
Yeah, I think there's a big incentive, or there's a process that's developed where it makes a lot of sense to not have a very big boundary between the user of the tool and the maker of the tool. So you'll have something, like Digital Kitchen is a great example where there's a software developer sitting right next to a designer. Occasionally they're in the same body, and it's really the same person.
Yeah.
And what that does is you end up with tools in a very general sense, and they end up, oftentimes the user for that tool is one person, and it could be the person who's making it. But those can kind of be these, your word for it is these zero scales. Like, it's never meant to scale. It's never meant to live beyond the lifespan of the project that it was designed for. But the processes that are uncovered through working directly with software in a very sort of fastly iterated, without the overhead of worrying about generalizing any of it, can be really productive.
Yeah, so thanks James, quite a bit on that. And we're going to call up Stephen, because as we're seeing this progression from... so these concepts of zero scale tends to go against how we've traditionally approached software at Microsoft, where we're very, very, very good at transactional scale significance. And we get small scale, high premium, but zero scale experiences, couture, right? It still can be a bit of a challenge for us as we're changing our culture to move into the space. Yet everything we care about tends to start at zero scale, right? It tends to start at a clay concept car, right? Concept cars are zero scale. You're never going to buy it later, but it points the direction, right? Fashion trends. Now, as we talked about, from the open frameworks and the academic, the pedagogy there, very focused on academia, places like MIT, the Media Lab, right? ITP, the places where Genevieve is going to be talking about as well. The academic is still very focused on exploring. Stephen now works for Wieden+Kennedy, and he's going to talk about how do you start bridging that gap between zero scale, where you're exploring the medium, to actually turning it into profit as Wieden+Kennedy. So let me get your slides up.
Okay. Can you hear me? All good here. My name is Stephen Shebro. I'm a creative technology lead with The Lodge. The Lodge is a department at Wieden+Kennedy, and this is the mission statement of Wieden+Kennedy right from the website. We are an independent, creatively driven advertising agency that creates strong and provocative relationships between good companies and their customers. We believe that it doesn't matter where, how, or in what medium an idea is expressed, you still have to start with a good one. So it's really, it's an ad agency, but we have a mission statement closer to what you'd expect out of how an artist would communicate with their audience. The Lodge is the creative technology and experience design group that sits in WK's creative department. And so it's one thing to note is that we are we're in the creative side of it. And the way that we fit in is we use code along with art and copy to concept, prototype, and build experiences that solve business problems in a way that feel like magic. So we're not a production department. This is what you usually see in ad agencies, is a creative technology department usually just means programmers that have good design sense. But really what's happening is traditional creatives are coming up with ideas, and then they're throwing them over the wall to the developers and having them make things. We're a creative department. We are a group of people that understand technology. We code, but we also we use this as an artistic medium, and therefore we're specially positioned to understand problems unique to some of our brands. This is something you hear a lot from programmers and ad agencies, is we need to get involved sooner. There's this problem that happens of your programmers are getting a project in and being told to make it, and the first thing they'll say is, this is not a good idea, this is a bad idea. If we got involved sooner, we could have fixed some mistakes along the way. So then the question comes up, how soon should programmers get involved? And that's sort of what the impetus for the Lodge was originally. It was trying to give us a little more autonomy, a little more freedom to get involved in the process sooner. And what we've been finding is that, especially when the client is a tech company or is related to technology at all, you want creative technologists in right at the beginning. We're usually able to find and solve problems that traditional creatives aren't able to, or even traditional planning and strategy folks don't notice the same way we do.
Not to take you off your flow, but just so it doesn't get missed, this is actually the inverse of a lot of what happens at traditional software companies, because you're a creative agency and you're arguing that developers need to be brought in, or people understand code as soon as possible. And the inverse story is in traditional software companies.
Right.
We're trying to bring design in as early as possible.
Yeah, and to back up a little bit, when we built the Lodge, we actually built the department out of people that were already there. We pulled people. We kind of looked over the agency and found all these people that were programmers. We've even pulled some people out of IT, some designers, some UX people, and we formed this team of just, if you can code, if you know technology, you're in. And we were expecting to have essentially what is this, like a programming department that did better. And what it's turned into is far beyond what we could have thought. We've really been able to dig and to look at our clients and find real problems they're having and find solutions for them, well beyond just making ads. And one of the things that we found is that by doing this more regularly, getting this team in front of the clients earlier on in the process, we can find out where they do belong or if they belong at all. Sometimes a client's problem can be solved with a great TV spot, which Wieden+Kennedy does plenty of. So the best way to describe what we do is we embrace technology as the best tool for solving the largest problems facing our brands and their customers. So we don't make ads, we solve problems. And we don't have a process, but we have principles that guide us through to these solutions. And I just want to walk through a few of the things that we've done. TurboTax is a client we started working with recently, and usually a department like ours in a talk like this would just go through and show you some execution, some projects that we've made, but the work that we've been doing has gone well beyond that. With TurboTax, we've been looking at what is essentially a tech company's platform through the creative tech lens, and we are changing the way that people do taxes. So it's not just coming up with an idea or an app. The message that's core to TurboTax's brand is it's amazing what you're capable of. And we have been looking at TurboTax, and we're continuously inventing new ways of removing complexity in taxes and the way that you do taxes. And this is a very fundamental thing in our lives. So to be able to go to them and then have the ability and the autonomy to say, hey, we're noticing some real problems with your technology, or not problems with the technology platform so much as just the whole concept of taxes. Our department, with this, with our perspective of spanning design and creativity and programming and everything, has had this look at it, which is really changing the way that you interact with your software. Weight Watchers is a client we acquired recently, and this is another one where, with food-related health problems in America on the rise, we've had this opportunity to use creative technology to solve an important cultural problem in a partnership with a client whose business is based on it. So this is one of those things where something as fundamental as health, from our perspective, we're able to look at it and work on a platform that is going to change the way that they do business. More specific example is this recent project called Happy Calories. So Coca-Cola wanted to add their voice to the health conversation. And we worked with a traditional creative team and Coke Global to develop an idea and an execution that addressed the topic in a direct and honest way, but was still seen through the Coke happiness filter. So we made people earn their Coke and have some fun doing it by having them ride this thing. So this is a big bike that we put down on Huntington Beach, and in the back there is a insane glorified Coke machine, and a Coke has 140 calories in it. And so we had this idea of, to get the message across that there are 140 calories in a Coke, maybe you shouldn't just sit there and drink them all day. You can have a Coke if you take the time to earn it. And so we put this bike together and we turned it into an exercise bike, and we actually have everything on here it's very handmade. We've got some monitoring equipment on there so we can accurately weigh the person and look at how fast they're riding. And that's used to send a Coke through this crazy contraption. And things go down slides and are pushed around by roller skates and go up auger lifts. And then eventually it's shot out. When you hit under 40 calories, the thing is shot into the machine. A little inflatable guy comes up, and people have a lot of fun doing it. This is a really interesting thing that's come up a few times now, that it's almost a service that we have just found ourselves doing on these bigger projects. Nike asked us to do something big at South by Southwest, and we decided, like, what's bigger than the sky? So we wanted to take the sky over. But we had less than a month and a really limited budget to make a projection screen the size of 4 city blocks hovering above Austin. Given those constraints, we didn't want to just dive in and then find out later that it wasn't going to work. So we created and centered this floating projection simulator. And something that's really interesting about this is that we actually tied all the parameters to hard costs. So we were able to figure out how much helium goes in the balloons, what the size is, and so we could do all the physical dimensions, tweak all these parameters, see what this thing looks like, put in all the parameters about the projector and see how far it would actually project. Would it be bright enough? We can change the view so we can see this is what it's going to look like from the ground. And then eventually, as we're playing with these parameters, we can see what it costs, what it's going to look like. And it's this, we're able to look at this and say, this is actually going to cost too much and take too much time. And we ended up not doing this project, but it's kind of an interesting thing that happened that I haven't seen in another team before. And we've made a few of these now, and it's been a really helpful thing to start doing. Something else we do at the Lodge, we're huge proponents of open source. We use it, we contribute to it, we make it. We're major contributors to the Cinder Creative Coding Framework. We do a lot of Django stuff and make a lot of other tools. And we found that it really improves the tools that we use and the relationship with the community that uses those tools. We've been working with Microsoft a lot on the Connect stuff for a while. This is a screenshot from one of the samples that we include in our Connect Common Bridge wrapper for Cinder. It basically takes your depth image and kind of blows it apart into particles, and it's really pretty and fun. And we've been working with Microsoft on this and the V2 sensor and getting these libraries out there in the world. And we get a lot of people contributing back, and it's great because a lot of people in this community are adverse to ad agencies and our type of business, and this is kind of a good bridge between the art community and the commercial world to say, like, we're not such bad guys. We can all be friends. Another open source thing that we've put together, this is a really fun thing, is called Composite. It's a service that enables multi-screen experiences in HTML5, and this is pretty significant because it gets you over the hurdle of finding a scalable model for distributed messaging that works on multiple platforms. And what that really boils down to is penguin curling across a bunch of devices. So we have this game, and something that's really cool about this is that we got this open source library to a certain point, and we went to Coca-Cola and we showed them this technology and we talked about how we wanted to use it, and they actually helped us finish funding developing the library. So we worked with one of our brands to develop an open source library. Active Theory made the front end on it, and as you can see on this, It's a very simple way. If you line up some devices, swipe across them while you're in a browser, it can be any browser, and then you can play a game all the way across them. And so you do curling, you sweep as you go down.
Stephen, actually, one question on this, because it's something that's been coming up in our conversations. Are you finding this more and more at Wieden+Kennedy and hopefully through other agencies that if you're working and using an open source library, you start negotiating in the contract as you do work for them, hey, this part that we do to enhance this open source library, we do want it covered because we want to give it back to the community?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. We have to be really transparent with our clients about what we're doing. There's a lot of times where we like to do our own R&D and we develop libraries for the community, and then we end out we usually focus on things that we think we're going to want to use, and when we go to our clients, we're very transparent about what we're using. Sometimes they don't want us to use open source libraries inside of there. They want us to develop everything. They want to own the code. But we have really good relationships with our clients, and they trust us with technology for the most part. And we've been finding more and more that they're open to being part of creating these things and getting them out there in the world. The last little project I wanted to show you is something that we did internally. There's a Wiedenism called the work comes first. And when we were asked to create a permanent installation for these words, our response was to make it a demonstration of the ingenuity, creativity, and patience for TDM that goes into truly great work. So we were originally tasked with just putting something on a screen with a projector, and we're like, no, we don't want to do that. We want to really demonstrate that our newly formed department knows how to make things and can figure stuff out. So we made this guy. I don't know if I'm getting any sound here. So this is a sign that is made. It's basically a giant wall. It's a pegboard wall, something you'd hang your tools from, and then we have it backed by about 1,000 solenoids that are attached to these painted screws. And so when you look at it, it just exudes work. It's a piece of hardware. You know, it's something. It's parts that you expect to see at the hardware store. And this is really built from the ground up in-house with like very little sourcing outside of our work. We custom designed and had these circuit boards printed to run this, complete with fancy little blue LED lights. And you can see all the wiring that we did and soldering. So it's something that it's a piece of technology. It's really pretty, but it's really handmade, and it kind of rounds off what a creative technology department can be. So rather than just creating executions, we do everything. You know, we went and grabbed all of our programmers. We got them all together, and what we found is that they can do everything from making stuff like this all the way down to digging into the deepest problems that are happening inside of a brand and finding real solutions for them. Thanks.
So we're seeing this thread continue to emerge from this new breed of engineer, and we don't have the labels for it. I think that's one of the challenges we've talked about quite a bit. I don't know, what's on your business card? Does it say wizard or?
Creative tech lead.
Creative technology lead. We have design engineer, we have art engineering, right? We have computational photography, right? Computational architect. This challenge that we don't even have a label that we, Joel, yours is?
I'm a technical lead, but I'm going to add creative to it.
And what's Josh? Yeah. Technical lead plus creative, right? Slash. So the fact that we don't even have a label for it makes it really hard to hire, makes it really hard when you write your resume, makes it hard if you walk into a place and say, are you a designer or a developer? And you say yes, right? Then nobody wants to believe you if they've been in traditional software yet. Wieden+Kennedy, top global brand. I think this brings up the question, how is it affecting how we define who a developer is, including this diversity, as well as how do we also train for them? So our next slides, we'd like to bring Genevieve Huffman, who's worked as an educator and a practitioner, and just all around everything. I think pretty impressive. Let me load up your slides. And if you could talk on the educational aspect of it, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, like Rick said, it's hard to sort of define what I do sometimes. I call myself an artist, I call myself a designer, creative technologist, sort of all of these creative coder, different roles, and also really passionate about education and sort of how, because I am not a technical person, like I came from the arts, studied sculpture and, you know, painting, but then sort of fell in love with immersive, like, artwork, and that's how I sort of came to this world. And so one of my passions is also teaching other people, because it's become so pretty much easy to do that now, how to do that as well. So to give you a little bit of background about my work, one of the ways I'm also supporting myself right now is I have a residency at Autodesk. They have a digital fabrication studio, and I've been doing some experiments there with 3D printing. Obviously, they kind of let us go to town on all their sort of state-of-the-art 3D printing machines, water jet cutters, that sort of thing. So this is a series where I'm sort of digitally creating landscape out of financial data. So you can kind of see those logos from the Dow Jones Industrial Average, but spatialized, essentially. There's a side view. And I've been working also to sort of like experiment with different materials, combine it with projection. I'm not really going into the background, but basically I'm taking raw data, sort of extrapolating it into code in a way that makes sense for what I want to create as a metaphor, not necessarily be readable to, you know, someone trying to invest. But this is a little bit of my process. I've been working on making digitally fabricated ice cubes with this same sort of process. So there you have the relief that's been 3D printed, and then I vacuum form a tray around it, and then I make little ice sculptures that I photograph so they can live on for posterity, but then they eventually sort of melt over that process of time. This is from a recent installation. I've been really interested in the Arctic and Greenland, so I'm sort of like creating objects that came from an expedition but don't actually exist, but they sort of walk this weird line between what is science, what is data visualization, and what is art. And so I'm hoping that they sort of ask people to kind of understand more what this process could be. So that I made an ice core out of resin that sort of has this lit quality inside. So it's not real, but it sort of evokes what's actually a real piece of like data visualization or data within the earth, which I think is really meaningful. But to backtrack a little bit, I got my start sort of in this world by accident. I finished my undergrad career in the arts or education in the arts, and I moved to San Francisco, and sort of through an accident of Craigslist and just knowing who she was, I ended up assisting this artist named Camille Utterback for a number of years. You might know her for this piece Text Rain, which was sort of like one of the first sort of interactive installations to get a lot of recognition, like basically a camera. It's that little black hole in the center of the wall. It's pointed out at people. She's able to sort of recognize that you're a person because it's a white lit background behind you. And so the text falls from the top of the screen and lands on you, and you're able to read it sort of using your body to do this. So I thought this was really amazing, and sort of over the course of, I was helping her out for 4 years, learned a lot about her process. She was also a self-taught programmer, which is kind of amazing. So she was, you know, before there was open frameworks or anything like that, taught herself C++ and how to do camera vision on a pretty like low-level scale, and was able to do this sort of in the 90s when not a lot of people were doing it. And towards the end of my time with her, we pitched a public art project. So we started doing much more interactive installations in public spaces. So % for art projects and that kind of thing. And this was a project that involves LEDs. So it's sort of, you can think of it as a visual light organ. Like there's these sensors in the handrail that has a palette of light cycling through it. And when you tap it, each one of those sensors is mapped to a hanging column. So you can kind of play the light pattern that's going to animate up that. I should have a video. But anyway, so I was like, this is amazing. It's like a physical experience in space, but wouldn't be possible without programming. And I found out about the grad program I went to through Camille, because she was actually an early alumna. So after I left San Francisco, I moved to New York and hung out at ITP for about 2 or 3 years. And ITP stands for the Interactive Telecommunications Program, and it's within the Tisch School of the Arts at NYU. And it was founded in 1973 by this sort of visionary woman named Red Burns. She believed in like the power of democratic media. She was really involved like with the personal porta-pack machine and public access television. Essentially, that was sort of like when there was only network media, that was like the biggest sort of cutting edge way for people to have some expression. So she formed this program. Telecommunications was like mainly the biggest form of technology at the time, but the name has stuck around. But obviously, like the technological fads have changed. And yeah, it's basically a 2-year program. It is within an academic institution, but I would say it's very anti-academic. They sort of take people from all walks of life, artists, engineers, fashion designers, advertising executives, pretty much anyone who wants to sort of dedicate 2 years to being like very hands-on with technology and sort of thinking about the future of what that could be in a very sort of playful environment. So I was there for 2 years as a student and then another year as a researcher, and it was fabulous. I really enjoyed my time there. It's where I met James, met a lot of people, Leah. This is a project, this is one of the first projects I made at ITP to listen to old tapes, but you had to sort of break them apart in order to listen to it. So I have like sort of an affinity for lost forms of technology that won't be around, sadly, for the future. You did have to destroy the tape in order to have it be in the installation, so I'm probably quickening that process, but it was a fun project. This was also a fun one that I worked on there. This is a project called Metro Change, and we were working for a while to get it sort of somehow integrated into the MTA, but the idea was, I don't know how many people ride the New York City subway system, but they're sort of designed to have like small amounts of value left over on your cards. So we were like, well, wouldn't it be cool if you didn't have to like just toss that or add more money to it or something? Like, what if you wanted to sort of use that money for some bigger purpose? So we prototyped a system that would read the value off your Metro card and then ideally pool that money together in order to donate it to some sort of larger, more useful thing. And for a variety of reasons, mostly because I think it's like a $55 million budget that translates into for the MTA. So they actually take that sort of lost money into their operating budget. Didn't fly, but it was it was actually really fun. We like hacked the Metro card and like figured out how to read, how that bit information was flowing. It was only successful when we used like a 30-year-old card reader, because the like ones built for credit cards was actually too fancy, so we couldn't get the right information off. ITP has a partnership with the IAC, the Interactive Corporation, something. They're a internet holding company, and they have this weird building on the West Side Highway, but the cool thing about their building is they have this like 120-foot wide screen in their lobby. So I was able to sort of work there for a while and develop content for the IAC. So this was a project where I'm pulling in photos that kind of go up on the Daily Beast. I think they have their like year-in photos, and probably from Getty Images or something, and just displaying them, sort of breaking them apart. They kind of animate around and come back together. So just sort of fun things that I was able to do sort of in the service of they just wanted something fun to go on the wall. Last summer I was also teaching a 2-week summer school course at the CIID in Copenhagen. And Josh can probably speak to that course or program a little bit more because he spent a whole year there. But it's kind of an amazing sort of ITP-like place in Denmark where people come together for, I think it's a year-long program. Normally this was the summer school, so it was 2 weeks. And so you have people from, some are professionals, some are sort of trying to figure out like, do I want to do interaction design, or what would that job look like? And so I was there with another colleague. We were teaching sort of a very quick introduction to physical computing. But we were doing it from a framework of trying to teach about biomimetic design. So design inspired by nature and technology interfacing with nature specifically. So this was an assignment that I thought was pretty fun. It was like, I think we taught them physical computing, just like a crash course, and then we had them go outside and do an observational exercise. And some of them were coming from design backgrounds, so they were used to sort of design thinking and thinking about a user's needs and what you might need to deliver to that person. And so we were kind of trying to fit within that framework, but then get them to think a little bit differently than maybe they were comfortable thinking. So we were like, what would you design for a non-human user? Like, what would that experience be like if it's not someone that you can sort of get in their head? Like, would it be a plant? Would it be a bird? Would it be a pigeon? We were sort of thinking along those lines. And we had an example of like, here's a very simple Arduino project that measures moisture. So how would you sort of hook that up to a plant? Maybe the plant can tell you when it like needs more watering, something like that. So it was pretty fun. They came back with like crazy ideas. I think this was like a better pigeon gathering area. There was like a UV light because they don't migrate and they needed better light in the winter to, you know, have that sort of southern vacation experience. There was like a plant that listened to music, of course. A tree that could tell you its name or how old it was, something like that. And then like a little prototyped ATV robot. But it was just, you know, very quick prototyping and kind of amazing to see projects that just happen really quickly, maybe because they weren't used to thinking along those lines. And just to wrap up, in addition to working at Autodesk, sort of doing my own work, I'm also working on a public art installation, sort of on my own or with a team, but I'm running the project, and we are going to be using a Kinect sensor in our long-term public art project, which is interesting, and we're using it for good reasons, but also challenging to think about how do you design for a technological installation that's supposed to last for 20 years. So that's a lot of what I've been doing recently. It's a memorial for a labor leader in San Francisco named James R. Herman. They're building a new cruise terminal that they're naming after him, and so we're designing sort of an interactive experience to tell a little bit of more about his life and then have sort of an installation in memory of him. So there's a touch screen that you can have sort of learn more biographical information about him, and then there will be like LEDs on the wall animating and displaying different quotes from him. So that's what I'm working on these days. Yeah.
So, Genevieve, you started off the conversation, I'll put you on a spot, but you started off the conversation by saying you're not technical. Yet everything you've just talked about is deeply technical. Mm-hmm. You're on the OFDev alias for the C++ libraries, right? Mm-hmm. You have so much of the stuff. Juxtaposed to the fact that almost all the slides you're showing in Denmark and ITP, the gender
is pretty
balanced on all of your photos. So is there a correlation there? I mean, at a certain point, where do you find this issue with you, kind of saying, does the word technical, I'm not a developer, mm-hmm. does that come with it already a certain sense of gender weight that you're trying to separate from? Or is this, what's going on there? Because you are a deeply technical person, but you're not self-identifying that way.
So I would never call myself an engineer. And I don't know if I would necessarily get a job at Microsoft doing anything technical. I'd probably be a designer. But it is interesting to be in this world of, because, you get credibility by writing good code. So I think on a certain level, it is pretty democratic. Granted, there's been sort of less focus on sort of the role of female technical education and how that fits into it. But I think at a place like CIID and ITP, and because maybe the idea of what technical literacy is, it's a little bit more fluid. So I feel fine, playing in this space because usually I'm collaborating, and so that's the thing. The process of collaboration and just being able to find the common ground in the language to sort of talk about the same things, I think is what's really important, because maybe I'm not going to be the fastest developer, but I still want to have input on what's going to be developed. Yeah, so I think that's sort of what needs to happen more of, and of course I'm a huge proponent of more female engineers. I should have gone to school for that, but
Great, thank you very much.
Thanks.
So, two more two more conversations as we're seeing this thread. Anna, can you come up really quick? So we're seeing a redefinition of who exactly uses code in computation and why. And I think Genevieve and with ITP, the schools that are coming in, how they're teaching a greater mix. Now, Anna, you're not on the programming side, but you are creative, right?
Correct.
So let me actually load up your slides. Oh, there we go. And if you talk a little bit of how you've been interfacing with technology on the art side and how you feel about that blurring of the line.
Okay, great. Should I use this guy?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Oh, give it a minute. Give it a minute.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Well, I went to school at DX Arts, along with James and a few other people here. I'm obsessed and captivated by motion and different ways you can display it, different ways that you can look at it and visualize it. This is one example. I'm intrigued with change in movement over time. I took a look at a dancer's motion, specifically her negative space, over the course of, I extruded it over time. Here you can see the discrete versus the continuous. I had it, I extruded it digitally in Maya and then contrasted it with a physicalized sculpture. And so I absolutely have to use technology in order to realize these things. This work was made in Unity. It was actually, I put these slides backwards. This was rendered real time in Unity. I collaborated with a software engineer, Pete Moss, and a dancer, Lara Garcia, to make this work that really did blur the lines of video art versus what Unity is usually made for games. And so we used the Connect to take a look at her motion, and really the technology allowed us to explore memory and memory is our core theme. The idea that memory is plastic, that it changes through time as you revisit a memory. It the way we use technology in order to emulate that. This piece was never the same every time you viewed it. So there were subtle differences that we couldn't use without it being rendered real time. And so this was an interesting project for me because it was more of a cinematic interpretation. In the past, I used a performance, and I worked with a dancer to extrude motion over time live, which gave its own aesthetic. But here, this was a mix between a poem and a cinematic video art piece.
Well, one quick question. Can you talk a little bit of how your workflow worked with you as a creative with the Connect and Unity and the developers?
Sure. For this, I was kind of the Imagineer and the instigator of this project, and so my collaborator Pete Moss was also an artist, but also the technical guru. We thought of a crazy idea, and then we brought on the dancer. We put 3 connects around to capture her movement. So we got 3 angles of her movement, and then put it in Unity. And so then I worked with Pete to create the breakdown of how this piece would come together, of how the changes in scenes and scene order and how her movement would change over time. And so we worked very collaboratively to make those emerging concepts.
And are these animates? Are these stills from an animated film, or are these the stills themselves, the final product?
These are stills from an animated, real-time rendered project.
Does any of that exist on like Vimeo or anything? If anybody
Yes.
wants some off?
Yes, you can watch it in Vimeo.
Off your name?
Off my name, last name is my website, and also my Vimeo account.
Great. Thank you very much. The one point on that to call out is we've talked a bit about open frameworks from academia and the kind of pedagogy of really making it accessible to these types of artists, coders, students who aren't really focused. We've talked about Cinder and its use. This repurpose of Unity has been an interesting thread that's kind of emerged a lot. I know, James, you did that work with Unity on Sniff, right? That was Unity-based and skeletal. Joshua, you do any work with Unity? On the Frog side, not too much, but with Anna's work. So that's another thing we're exploring and how Connect V2 will plug in there. I think our last speaker for today, Michael, can you come up? This aspect of not only how are we bringing design earlier into the engineering process, but engineering earlier into the design process, and this changing face of developer as more and more industries are leveraging computation. Michael is a computational architect. I'll let you introduce yourself and what Soft Lab is. And the emphasis here would be on how creatives and creative industries are leveraging computation in very new and unique ways. So,
okay, cool. Thanks, Rick. So I have a small design studio in New York City called Soft Lab. My background is I went to school for architecture, so I have undergrad and a grad degree in architecture. So my mom still asks me why I went to architecture school twice. We do a lot of installations, spatial installations. So I'm just going to show one project today, which is actually one of our first large-scale installations. We do a lot of different other work. We do a lot of video editing. We used to do a lot of interactive web work, and now we're also getting into doing interactive installations, which I'm really excited about. But most of the people in the studio are architects, and most of them, I think most of them, more importantly, are tinkerers. So they're not really the best at anything, but they're very good at solving problems, and also not taking no for an answer. So they'll take software and customize it in unique ways to make these things. So we use a lot of different softwares. I mean, as far as my title goes, if you ask anyone in the studio, they'll say my title is the asshole. But I basically just kind of move around more now, kind of helping and guiding everyone. But this project is actually one I worked on personally, and this was for a group show in Williamsburg. So this is a lot of what one strain of our work looks like, which is building these sort of spatial installations that are very efficient. So it's a structural surface, a minimal surface, so something that holds its own weight without, let's say, a structural frame. So the surface itself is in some ways engineered. And then rationalizing that, so figuring out a way to basically build it, in this case out of many pieces. We were asked to be part of a large group show in a convent in Williamsburg in Brooklyn, and it was kind of interesting because since it was a convent, it had many small rooms, and we had just got finished doing our first installation, which is probably a quarter the size of this, and we were kind of like, wait, that's too much work. We're never doing anything like that again. And then someone invited us to the show based on the previous show a month later, and we kind of had a meeting. Hey guys, do you want to do this? And everyone, I was surprised in the studio, said yes. This was part of research I did while I was in grad school at Columbia with a couple of guys who also have studios in the city, and it was basically figuring out a way to automate the production of a surface like this. So this is a room we were given, and so I'm not going to go too much into the design, but basically the surface, the idea was it would connect to all the apertures of the room so that from the outside you wouldn't see the room itself, you'd see the inside of the piece. Which a lot of our work has to do with exploring these types of spatial geometries. Let's see. So to do this, we came up with a system where we would produce triangular panels for the surface, and then each panel would have its own unique clip or connector that basically registers or articulates the angle between the panels. So the piece I just showed has about, I think, triangulated, it has about 1,600 panels. So each panel is unique, and the angle between each panel is unique. So in this case, this is something I think literally, I mean, this is a big argument in architecture, whether things are drawn by hand or done by hand or how they're produced. I don't think this could be done by hand at all. You know, even if you were able to find, you know, your worst enemies to do this, there would be a certain degree of human error, you know, where you get angles, measure angles wrong. But yeah, you wouldn't want to invite anyone to this party of drawing this by hand. So this is research I was doing while I was at Columbia, and it's basically we created a custom tool within Maya. So this uses MEL, which is my embedded language. It was a big deal at the time because Maya was one of the few softwares at the time that kind of was very open to customization. So a lot of big animation houses, I don't know if you guys can see that very well, but a lot of the big animation houses use Maya simply because it's a background, because they customize it a lot. So what's happening is this is part of the surface, and it's basically laid out all the triangles flat and then just generated all of the clips. So you'll see they're all labeled and they all have the proper angle or degree. So each one's labeled with adjacent panel and you know, which panel it goes to and which edge of the triangle it goes to. So these are the triangles. You can see the notches have also been added to them in the labels. So this goes directly to a CNC machine, in this case a laser cutter, so something that just takes these drawings. So there's no contractor in between. These are the drawings that go straight from manufacturing, so the tool paths basically. And since we're using Maya, which is animation software, we can basically, which a lot of these parts have history, we can put the piece back together, and this becomes a drawing we use to assemble the piece. So this is the earlier work we were doing, and this is, again, you know, as Rick was saying, I mean, a lot of our stuff is bespoke or zero scale, so we produce tools which take a certain amount of investment, and some of them are modular, so we can use them in other parts and pieces of other projects, but most of the tools we develop are custom developed for the project, and in some ways it's exciting, but in other ways it's also tiring. I mean, now we do a lot of work in a CAD package called Rhino, which has a sort of visual coder or network, I guess a node-based code engine called Grasshopper, which is really nice. It's really easy to use. And so even though we automate a lot of the process, you know, we end up, you know, working in the real world, which is a big part of our practice. So even though we're using stuff that is very precise, as soon as you take stuff off the flat screen, it becomes, you know, very dirty. In this case, this is basically a drawing of one of the pieces, the north side unrolled, and it's covered with, you know, black marks because someone's been laser cutting these pieces for about 24 hours straight, and their hands are covered in burnt cardboard. And so even though, you know, it is very precise, we still need, you know, high-tech tools like scissors to customize the things on site. If some of the panels are too acute, you can see here, you know, some of these clips are starting to intersect. And so this was carried from our studio at the time, you know, who thinks it's very funny that now we have to go and sort of give it a haircut in certain places. And then this is us putting in, this is a sort of very shortened version of a presentation of this project, but this is a slide I really love to show because, you know, you go from the precision of a couple of millimeters to 3 pizza boxes. You know, in the sense, this was one of our first installations, as I said. So this is the only piece of equipment that we had really was a ladder. We didn't bring, now we, you know, we come with like drills and things like that. But, you know, as people who normally worked mostly doing video editing and interactive web work in the beginning, which again, you just need a computer. So we showed up with all these panels, you know, everything's going to work. It's very precise. It was generated on a computer. We didn't have any idea of gravity, weather, you know, whether it's humid in the space. And so everyone, there are 40 artists, you know, scavenging around. There's one ladder that you kind of have to share with 40 artists. The furniture that's there is stuff we found in the convent because we didn't bring another ladder. And, you know, luckily we ordered pizza that day, which we used to shimmy this piece that I guess we thought was going to float in air until we installed it. And then this is the final piece installed. And this is just the sort of the chipboard panels. And then we also, the final piece was clad with reflective mylar. And this was, again, this was something we added to we added in the original design because we produce these shapes sometimes which are very pure engineered forms, but that's not so much what's important to us, but what's important to us is people discovering or engaging with those projects. So the idea with the mylar panels was that it would also confuse people the same as it would from the outside, that it reflects the surrounding room. You can see the floorboards in the piece, so that people are sort of forced to walk around the piece. We're very much about producing an experience rather than a sort of objectified art piece or something that's on a pedestal that you kind of look at from far away, but more something that you engage with, which is something that is very exciting for me with some of the other more interactive physical installations we're starting to do. But again, this is just one project that kind of shows our workflow. And I think it shows it very well in that we're using an animation package and we're kind of customizing it to do what we want. I mean, Maya is not a typical software you would use to produce drawings for architecture. And that's it. Thanks.
If you could sit down, I think we have time for a couple questions. If you spoke, Genevieve, can you come up? Anna? And James, can you come up? And Stephen? And just take a chair. We have a couple microphones, right? Does anybody have any questions on anything you've just seen or anything you haven't seen?
You were saying that it's hard to, there's no role name for it. And I see there's ad agencies doing it, there's architecture. It's just like, it feels like it's happening everywhere. If somebody wants to work doing just that and not just as a side project, where do they start? Like, what title do they look for? What kind of companies? Is it ad agencies? Is it a piece of Microsoft? Is it a big company? Is it a small? You know, it's just hard to know where those jobs are.
Yeah, the term that is getting thrown around the most is creative technology, and I think it's starting to find its home a bit more these days. For the past couple of years, creative technology has been used to define anything that involved programming or design, but I think we're starting to see creative technology defines the act of using technology as an artistic medium. So if you're looking for a job in that, you know, you'll see the term creative technologist, and upon investigation, you'll probably find out what the roles of what the company calls a creative technologist are. They might just be programming. They might be doing what it's supposed to do, which is to use technology as a medium of artistic expression.
Andrew Bell, who couldn't be here, but from Cinder, they've been exploring the term in film. They call it the technical producer. That's kind of a very niche industry. And I think, Michael, from the architecture side, I think it's interesting because we've had an ongoing conversation for a while now that in software, we kind of let that title get misappropriated, right? You're a software architect, but actually you're more a structural engineer. And architect in just about every other industry is someone who's, you know, they don't build buildings or creating experiences, like you were saying. How do you feel when you hear software architect, or is this something that, do you think in software it's kind of misapplied, or is the word architecture, is that what we're looking for, the creative, this balance between engineering and creativity, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, when someone just says architect, I'm sometimes confused, like, yeah, what does that mean? Are you a software architect, or, you know, I think, you know.
Or a real architect? Is that what you're
well, I think an architect in, let's say, the larger context of building acts more like a director on a film in that, you know, maybe they're generalists, but they manage many different professions on a bigger project, you know, but there's still a sort of design background, but in an architecture office, and that's the big sort of struggle. There's always project managers and designers and lead architects and project architects, same in an agency. And I think, you know, when we first started studio, we were doing a lot of work that was more video, and I was put on sometimes animation teams, and because I knew Mel, I was a technical director basically, you know, which was what it was called in the animation studio. And you're just I think, you know, that's what you were saying earlier, you just solve problems, but you're not really giving any design direction. So I think the ability for a creative person to customize the tools that they're using, I mean, whether it's a painter or not, but imagine having a brush that you could make it any shape that you liked. I think that's, you know, what's happening now. I mean, this stuff is very big in architecture right now. So there's a lot of people in as in, I don't know what you call it, building architecture, that are interested in code and computation and generative techniques for making, let's say, shapes or form. But yeah, I mean, I think it's the difference between, you know, someone can drive a car but can't really work on it, and then there's a person that can turn the car into a hot rod, and then there's a person that that can build a car from scratch, which is very rare. But I think now there's a lot of tools that allow the in-between zone where it's someone who can customize or hot rod a car. And that's what we tend to do a lot in the studio. I mean, none of the things we're making we're building from scratch, but
It's that maker tinker spirit you're talking about applying it. And Jen, the question was on getting a job, but I think before that it could actually be one on education. And I know Leah, and although you're sitting down here, you could be sitting up here too. You're doing quite a bit on education with very young people using processing, right? And Genevieve, in terms of what you were teaching at Denmark and ITP, how do you think education is changing to embrace this kind of blurry line of artist, computational, tinkerer, engineer / developer, creatives, hyphenated?
I think that's a lot of the work that processing does and open frameworks does, just to get out of the box coding environments up and running for people really quickly. I think that's a huge barrier that has been overcome in education. It's a way to get immediate visual feedback, which I think is important for some people, designers kind of going towards coding.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It seems for a lot of us from the software side, our first project is Hello World, right? Yet for everybody else,
It's
their
the
first
bouncing
project's
ball.
a red circle, right?
Exactly.
That's kind of that difference between is your first project a red circle moving across the screen or Hello World. It almost forces at an early split if you're going to be the traditional CS or if you're going to be one. James, can you talk a little bit? He's not here, but can you talk a little bit from the School of Poetic Computation and what that's trying to happen there from the education side?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in response to your question directly, it generally doesn't come with the term first, and terms and self-association comes afterwards, where you're like, oh, I'm doing this thing and now I have to describe it to somebody, and that's when it becomes problematic. But it tends to be that you're already doing the work at that point, so it's like a lesser problem. So the idea of creating a term or a name for yourself, or like a word for it, and starting at the same time, I think is a little out of order. And so your point, so Zach Lieberman, along with Jen Lowe and actually Taiyun Choi, a lot of people in New York in this community have started a new school, which is an alternative education model called the School for Poetic Computation. I'm not involved with it at all, but it's sort of part of our community. And they have a new set of terms also that have this idea of a computational poet. So they don't associate with the idea of artist because there's a lot of baggage with that word, a lot of ego associated often, and rather this idea of creating something that's poetic because it has sort of intrinsic cultural or emotional value using computers or computation.
So on the far, so back to Stephen, I guess, for the final part of this answer, because you're an agency that works at this and you hire people. How in the world do you look to hire people into the lodge if you do hire externally?
We say that we hire wrong. So it really is on a case-by-case basis. It's like people will, fortunately we're in a position where people will seek us out. There are a lot of people that we go and look forward to, but I don't think you can really say there's one thing that we're ever looking for. Even when you look at our department as a whole, we basically have a lot of people that make up this really nice mosaic that just results in these really great things happening. But we kind of run the gamut of people who are really who fall heavier on the sort of like visual and user experience side, and then all the way over to the full-on engineer can do things on a really low level. And I guess when you're trying to put a department together like what we have, it's less about just trying to fill specific roles and kind of looking at like what an individual does and where they fit into your bigger picture.
Do you think the company culture has as much of an effect? I mean, can this role exist in a company that doesn't optimize for design or optimize for creativity?
It's tough to say. We have the ethos at Wieden+Kennedy is probably not quite the same as something that would be like you'd find at like a publicly shared or publicly owned company where there's shareholders to appease. We pride ourselves on taking risks, and so I wouldn't say we have all the answers, but we put ourselves out there. We take risks in hiring and what we do, and it all seems to, for the most part, it seems to pan out pretty well.
Any other questions? Any other topics? Yeah. Oh, let me get your mic so they can hear it on the video.
I'm just kind of curious. I really much enjoyed your presentations. I'm just curious whether you guys, what are your thoughts on the dimension of time and the timelessness of the artifacts that you guys create? My wife is an architect, and we talk about this quite a lot. It's kind of fascinating to me that any conference room table, any artifact that we live in will probably outlast the technology that we live in an order of magnitude bigger way. So it's just always interesting to how do these technology-driven projects last? How do they age? And are they really du jour? Are they like right now in the moment? And the whole point is that they're just a drop right now, and that's what it is. Or is there some thought given to in the design process about how do you account for the fact that Kinect is interesting right now, but is it going to really be interesting like 5 years from now? And what's interesting about it? Is it the fact that all of a sudden the depth sensing became easy and cheap to do, or is it? And is that going to look kind of naive 10 years from now, looking back at what's happening right now? So I would just like to hear some thoughts on that.
I have to think about that a lot right now because I'm trying to make a 20-year maintenance plan for a technology installation. And I think, it's a toss-up because I want the immediacy of an experience that responds to you. I would like it to age well. I'm going to provide guidelines of how to do that. I'm buying backups of pretty much every piece of equipment that we'll be using to replace them over 20 years. I've worked in museums also, in conservation departments for media artworks that have been collected by MoMA and the Whitney. And it is something that tons of people are really, trying to figure out right now as artwork kind of moves in this direction, as just our lives move in this direction, because we sort of design for obsolescence or just having the faster thing sort of available within 3 years. But if you designed a piece of art to function in a certain way, you can't just replace that computer when it breaks down. So it's either a matter of using old pieces of technology and trying to keep them updated, or literally sort of a museum collects a piece and it's, you give them a circuit board diagram because they're going to have to refab that at some point. So there's various ways to sort of figure it out. But it's true, like this medium doesn't lend itself to longevity necessarily.
Yeah, especially with advertising, a lot of times things that we're making, it's very ephemeral nature to it because we're making something that's supposed to live for 3 weeks for a campaign. Sometimes we're going to make something that will last, forever. Like the work comes first wall. That's something that we want to be there for a long time. But if you look at it, we started off with old technology. It's electricity and solenoids with a couple depth cameras, and it should be able to. And we built that to last for a long time with a plan in place to keep it alive as an art piece. But the commercial world, I think it's a little different than what a lot of these guys are working on, in that we're pushing technology really hard to do something that is only built to last for the duration of a campaign.
James, this is one of the themes in your Clouds film itself, right? Because you didn't approach it as a tech demo, right? It's a difference between a prototype and a vision type, right? I mean, you wanted to tell a story about technology, and you're not saying, hey, look at me, I'm using the Kinect to do depth data. It wasn't about the tech, it was about the use of it. But from those interviews, because this was a very recurring question, watch Clouds. In Clouds, this is a common thing, yeah. What are your views on this? And from?
Yeah, I think that we struggle with that a lot in the project, especially in this idea that making design fiction, and if history goes in a certain way, then it can render your work irrelevant, or can make it seem, if it actually happened, then it just seems banal, because that's the reality we live in, so it doesn't seem that provocative anymore.
Nothing expires faster than novelty.
Sure, yeah. I think that one thing that I'm attempting to do with this work is one thing that history will never expire in a way, because you create a portrait of what was happening right now, and if it's told as a human story, as something that's part of a lineage or a genuine community that exists, that sure they're galvanizing around technology, but it's really about the interaction they're having and the structure of their interaction, this community of artists, ourselves included, then that becomes hopefully a more timeless portrait, because it was told using the medium of the time that it was happening in. So that was the choice there. So it's not anchored on the novelty, but rather it's anchored on the reason that it looks that way, or that it can be told using that tool. So then looking back, it may feel old, but also the ideas they're talking about will be grounded in what was interesting to us, in this period. So it would become like an archive.
Yeah, I think from the business side of things, it's fascinating because when we're talking about zero scale, that attitude is about exploration, creativity, the freedom to fail, following your passion, and all of you, part of the Hackfest, your jobs are kind of making the invisible visible for the first time, really pushing those boundaries, see what sticks. And the first step is commoditizing that and selling it to high brands who are looking for the next cool thing, right? To really, but not just that, but you understand, on that agency space. But then you start bringing in components. Eventually it scales out, and like with your Cinder plugin. When you were doing it, when Connect just came out and you were hacking it and there weren't plugins or anything for it, it was the first time, but it triggered people's imaginations. 2 years later, it's part of the component that comes in the SDK for everybody to use it at scale, right? So it's not that there's zero scale and a chasm. Zero scale sets the direction and tone for these explorations that, best case scenario, does become banal because 5 years later everybody's doing it, but that's actually your victory condition, right? I mean, you changed technology.
Right, and that's something that we're trying to do with our brands as well, like with the work that we're doing with TurboTax, for example, where right now we're working on changing the way that you do taxes, and there's going to be an execution around that. The execution will one day be superseded, and that will go away, but the bar is going to be set. Like this, your whole approach and understanding of taxes is going to change, and it's going to be made easier, and that's going to be the place where things are going to need to start from in the future. And so in that sense, that is creating a lasting effect.
Great. I think we're almost out of time. Is there one more quick question? Let me grab that one.
Thanks. I was curious on the tool side of things. So I'm started out as a musician. I'm in marketing here, so not technical at all. Hated math growing up, but started getting into coding a couple of years ago because fascinated by the technology and what could be done. And it seems like the ability or the maturity of the tools has the capacity to unlock new ways to express ideas and be inventive. And so I'm curious to know, like, where you guys think from a tool perspective, like, what are the things that are really interesting? Where do you think things are going in terms of, like, Brett Victor talks a lot about, has some really compelling ideas about how the tools should be evolving. And I'd just be curious to get your takes on that.
Well, I guess maybe define a little bit better what you mean by tool.
So it seems like so processing seems to be one that stands out, gets mentioned a lot. Apple just yesterday with Swift, how they've got this, it's a more sort of interactive environment in which to code. So does that help?
Yeah, I think that, I think about this a lot, contributing to OF, and watching how open frameworks, which is in a lot of ways similar to processing, has changed. In a lot of ways that it posits itself as being progressive, like it's always enhancing, but actually in a lot of ways it's just kind of a moving target, and it tends to follow the trends of what people are making. So in a way that I could say they are maturing, but I think that if I were to be truthful, isn't necessarily an accurate description of what's happening. They're actually just adapting to different fads and interests. And so if you're looking at so from an art historical perspective, you think of tools as being what supports the ideas that people want to talk about right then. You can see trends in the fact that a lot of stuff has moved from 2D to 3D, and things have involved a lot more about sensing more than just pure visualization. But then in that process, we've actually lost a lot of ways that we used to work with this, even in the last 10 years, in terms of pixel manipulation or different types of line drawing and specifics there. So that you can trace this through the projects that people are making. So with things like processing and open frameworks, which may be different than ideas of Unity, which have much more of a roadmap in front of them, you end up looking at the artwork that people are making or the design projects that people are making as the sort of canaries in the coal mine for where the tool will move.
How do you think open source has changed the conversation around tools? Because we have open frameworks processing Cinder. They're all open source. I mean...
Yeah, and I think with Cinder, it's a little bit different of a story because we have sort of two levels. We have the core, which especially right now we're making sure is becoming something that is this really solid professional toolkit on which you can rely, but at the same time is open source and has a community around it that allows you to plug things in and make your own manipulations to it. So it sits in this kind of interesting space of we want to make a really professional product that you can completely hack. So as far as maturity goes, I have to go kind of with what James is saying, where there's a lot of stuff that's just changing. I think the core is maturing and it's becoming something we can rely on more. I think that's kind of happening with all of these frameworks is as people play with them and start to use them in ways that they need to make a living.
I think it's also not just one. Like I was trying to think, I was like, what's my tool? And it kind of depends like what I'm trying to do. So what I definitely developed at ITP where I, got a more kind of structured programming education. I just want to know enough so I can get my foot like learning the next thing that I need to learn. So a lot of what I'll be doing is like using the right sort of node-based framework if I want to do some socket stuff, and then it'll connect back to something else through OSC. So it's just a lot of like patching together the right tool for the right application and then putting them all together somehow. So a lot of and I like first used Max MSP, so I was like connecting little boxes and I had like a little programming block that I could kind of put together. So that was like a nice introduction of like, oh, this is sort of like the way to think programmatically. But then I think the nice thing about open frameworks and Cinder and processing is you're not fed those little nuggets. It's up to you to kind of figure out what you're going to create. So it's a much more blank canvas approach, I guess. Yeah.
And I think I think the main thing you're starting to see lately as more and more people are getting involved is these tools are working better. That's really what it comes down to. I think even 5 years ago, there's still going to be new libraries that have missing pieces, but I think 5 years ago you would get a library or a framework and be like, oh, I want to go do this thing, and you would find in the code there's like section missing, you should write this code here. Yeah. And you're starting to see less of that. It feels more and more like I need to do this thing that's kind of out there, and maybe this one particular technology doesn't exist, but I can grab these two libraries that already work great and that a lot of people are using and put my own thing together. And it just more and more it seems like when you reach out into the open source world, you're getting something you can rely on.
I would think you mentioned Tinker, right? And I think that's one of the common threads here is not all tools are equal, and some tools are very Tinker friendly. I mean, processing, Leah, you're teaching processing to very young children here when you're not working on the Internet of Things, all the way up to Jer Thorpe being on stage at TED using the exact same processing, giving talks for New York Times and data visualizations, right? Because it has intelligent defaults. And I think at Microsoft, many of our tools turn into components sometimes, and it's like, you're young, learn Scratch, maybe JavaScript, then VB, then C#, you got some gray in your beard, C++, right? I mean, because those aren't necessarily Tinker languages out of the box, right? I mean, in open frameworks, though, C++ library, one line of code, I've created a texture, OF image, load this file. In my draw loop, one line of code, draw the image, right? If I wanted to do that with C++ and DirectX flat, it's like 1,000 lines of code because I have to understand back buffers and setting up parameters before I can do the swap chain and then pushing it out. That's not Tinker friendly. But OF abstracts C++, makes it Tinker friendly, and we have artists coming in and creating amazing things that traditional engineers, it's in our blind spot, right? So I actually think the tools question is a very, very important question for Microsoft to dig into, simply because we're so good at Legos, and yet these abstraction layers let you play with them like clay, like let you tinker, right? So I actually think it's a critical point for Microsoft to be hearing exactly those questions. What we're going to do with Internet of Things, will it be tinker-friendly, or is it already going to be optimized for professionals? So, thank you very much. We went all the way up to 3 o'clock. We're going to be here for, so actually, thank you, everybody.